The events of this evening have given us plenty to talk about with our panel this hour. Christina Greer is an associate professor of political science at Fordham University and the author of Black Ethnics. Basil Smikle is a Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. Maria Hinojosa is the founder of Futuro Media and the anchor of NPR's Latino USA. And Dr. Lipi Roy is an internal medicine physician and an MSNBC medical contributor. Good to have all of you with us tonight. And Dr. Roy, I'm going to start with you on the medical implications of tonight's event. The event was not sold out. There were still thousands of people bunched together, few of them wearing masks. It's been described by Tulsa's health official as the head of the Department of Health in Tulsa as a possible super spreader event. How do you see it?
Well, good evening, Joshua. And yeah, the good news is that it wasn't at capacity. There were, I'm sure, well less than 20,000 people. So that's the good news. But here's the bad news. And unfortunately, we're going to have to unpack a lot of it. You know, I think back to when I was in first year university, I took Calculus 101. You might have taken Journalism 101. Well, let me tell you, our current elected officials are failing Infectious Disease 101. The only two measures that we know that reduce the transmission of the virus are 6 feet distance and masks. And most of the rally attendings, very few of them were practicing either measure. In fact, they were standing shoulder to shoulder, shouting and cheering, which we know spreads the virus even further. I mean, these are the dynamics of the disease, Joshua, and I'm just really concerned that we're going to see a rise in cases again.
Well, Basil, the crowd size was one of the things that the president alluded to earlier this week. Here's part of what he said.
And we expect to have, it's like a record-setting crowd. We've never had an empty seat, and we certainly won't in Oklahoma.
So he said that that was what was going to happen, Basil. That is not what happened at all. What do you read into the turnout?
Well, it's a few things. One, I do think that owing to some of your correspondents reporting, there are people in this country that do feel that we are really divided right now. And while I do still think that the president has a lot of sort of core supporters, there are a lot of folks that used to support the president that are now taking a second look at him. We've seen that from some of the polling, some of the folks that endorsed him or had voted for him before are now taking a step back because they feel that at this moment in time, he has not done a lot to lead the nation. But I think one of the other things that is interesting about this, about the crowd size, is that I imagine there are a lot of people that are concerned about the virus and the ability to spread that virus in an event such as this. If you look at the fact that Major League Sports is still trying to wrestle with this, right? Even if they're trying to set up a bubble where it's really just the players, they still haven't figured this out. Yet the President of the United States is putting all these folks into one confined space, and some earlier reporting suggests that the vast majority of people in that arena did not wear a mask. And so I also think that there are folks that are still concerned about the virus, about getting exposed to it, despite the fact that the president is trying to go back to business as usual.
And you can see quite a few people in the upper bowl of the BOK Center where the seats were very, very sparsely populated tonight. Professor Greer, Mr. Trump won Oklahoma in 2016 by a landslide. Here's that statement from the campaign regarding tonight's attendance. It reads in part, quote, "Sadly, protesters interfered with supporters, even blocking access to the metal detectors, which prevented people from entering the rally. Radical protesters, coupled with a relentless onslaught from the media, attempted to frighten off the president's supporters," unquote. Professor Greer, even if that was true, which we have no evidence of, but even if it was, I'm wondering how much that even matters. I mean, the president was on his political turf, so even if this rally was not well attended, how much does that actually portend for November?
Hi, Josh. Well, we know that the president is on the defensive right now. I mean, the backdrop, as my newly minted PhD colleague, Basil Smikle, just said, the backdrop is COVID. We have over 120,000 Americans who have died from this virus. We have over 40 million Americans who have filed for unemployment, not even including those who aren't eligible for unemployment. So the president definitely can't run on his record the way he possibly wanted to or assumed that he could. So he has to distract. He has to use racist, divisive language. He has to make it such that the media is the enemy of the public and that everything is even deeper than fake news, that the people in the media are actively going out against him to stir up some sort of political violence, which is not proven and is not true. And so I think this is the first time that a lot of folks are really seeing this president losing a grasp because he's overplaying his hand. I mean, sadly, we still have far too much silence from his Republican colleagues in the Senate and the House, but he is losing a lot of ground, largely because some of his supporters are recognizing where are those tax cuts that were promised. You know, tax season has passed, and many of them are not seeing the benefits that they were promised by the president, and they are very concerned about his racist rhetoric that is actually poisoning a lot of the soil in America, and they're seeing that there's possibly a more productive way to have some of these really hard conversations about race and racism in this country. So that might explain not just some of the absences that we saw this evening, but also this idea that the way he's been able to try to frame his leftist enemies and the media isn't working the way it has in the past few years.
Yeah, he did rail against the media quite a bit. He did also mention the tax cuts, said that they were the largest in American history, which adjusted dollar for inflation is a debatable point, but we'll set that aside. Maria, President Trump has said...
They may be the largest in American history, but just only for a small, very, very, very small percentage of wealthy Americans.
Right.
So, yes, there's truth in that, but just for the rich.
Maria, President Trump has said that his administration plans to try again to get rid of DACA after losing that case before the Supreme Court this week. We'll talk more about that case in just a minute, but there was a poll from Politico this week that found most voters support protecting Dreamers from deportation, including people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. He did not mention that a lot during the rally. He mentioned Mexico kind of obliquely, but didn't say a ton about it. How might the DACA strategy fit into his overall strategy for 2020?
Well, it was a big loss for him, Joshua, as you know. And for those people who are part of the program, it was the first time in many, many years that they were able to exhale. So I just, people don't really understand the kind of mental health pressure and stress that they were under. But, thinking about that question within the context of what's being shown on screen right now, this rally, I can't forget how Donald Trump actually began his campaign. So not the re-election now, but his campaign was begun by insulting people like me because I was born in Mexico and creating an image that was false and using hate speech, which has now become really quite normalized. And so it's very strange when I'm thinking about this particular crowd and the fact that they're going there in support of that major policy, which is to build a wall, but at the same time might have some comprehension about their neighbors or the fact that their kids are friends with DACA recipients. It's really quite confusing, but that's actually quite typical of the American electorate. But, I have to say, Joshua, as somebody who is a survivor of COVID, and so I'm really happy that you have a doctor on this episode right now, is that as a survivor of COVID, I'm looking at these people and I'm thinking they're going to go into denial. They'll get sick in about, 5 to 10 days. They'll start feeling achy and they'll want to deny that they're feeling sick because that's what happens with this illness. You don't want to believe it. They might not get tested. And that's where it gets really scary. And so I actually feel for them. I feel a lot for them. And I'm sorry that that's what they're being exposed to.
Very briefly, Dr. Roy, before we pause, for people who attended this rally tonight, what would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so concerned that there are going to be people there who are probably super spreaders, who are not just spreading the virus to 1 or 2 people, but to 20, 30, 40 people. People should get tested, but look out for symptoms, self-quarantine. I seriously doubt that people are going to do that because they went to this rally without wearing masks and without the physical distancing. But keep an eye out for symptoms and try to wear a mask when you get back home so you don't infect the people who wisely stayed back home.
The mask is to protect others, not just to protect yourself. Dr. Lipi Roy, thank you for making time for us. The rest of the panel is going to stick around because there's much more to come tonight. Attorney General William Barr says President Trump has officially fired Manhattan's top federal prosecutor at Barr's request. Jeffrey Berman refused to resign last night. We'll have more on that back and forth and the investigations that Berman oversaw into some of the president's top allies next.